If I just might finish, please.
Misinformation is rife in New Zealand and it's causing tensions that bubbled over into the recent protests at Parliament.
Delving deeper into this.
AM's also been the target of fake news.
Mainly this thing.
Well, joining me now is sociologist Paul Spoonley.
But other stuff. Also,
If I might finish.
How much of an impact will that protest have had on misinformation and its spread now? Because all that rage surely moves somewhere else.
Yes, well, I don't think it's going to go away. It came to a bit of a point in Parliament, obviously, and the online distrust and anger had been building for some time, so it found an outlet.
she was asking where to from here, though I think some experts specialise in stuff everybody else already knew.
People have gone down rabbit holes and they're going to stay down rabbit holes. And so I'm not sure what the answer to your question is. I suspect there'll be ongoing challenges, ongoing protests.
Doesn't commit to that.
There'll be a lot of misinformation and disinformation out there. And so, as we've seen in other parts of the world, this new online anger will be with us for some time.
Sure, antagonism online has exploded, but that's set against a media culture backlash that started with Me Too vigilantism, extended to woke social media lynch mobs, and is being exacerbated by COVID, economic stress and dislocation.
When you say misinformation and disinformation, what are you saying is the difference?
Misinformation is where you share material which is incorrect, but without really the intent to do so. Disinformation is where you produce material, circulate it, where it's designed to mislead.
So misinformation, you didn't know it was wrong. Disinformation, you knew it was wrong all along. So this stuff, comment section rule, no sharing misinformation. So they'd be using the word wrong because you can't accidentally spread something untrue while knowing it was untrue, or it wouldn't be an accident, would it?
People stuck at home are being bombarded with misinformation.
I think for the most part people have been using the terms interchangeably, and it appears to all go to motive, which may seem glaringly obvious sometimes, but you can't always be certain of that.
Just remember, it's not a lie if you believe it.
And how much of the disinformation that circulates in New Zealand originates in New Zealand, or how much of it is imported?
Well, there was a very interesting report last year from the Institute of Strategic Dialogue. The techniques and very often the messages are international, but the issues are local issues.
I mean, they got the same shit over there that they got here, but it's just there, it's a little different.
Example.
All right.
So what they do is they take some of those international messages and apply them locally.
Does New Zealand have a particular issue with extreme alt-right groups, or is this an issue that is worldwide and affects us as it does with other global issues?
When you don't know who to blame, who do you blame?
Extreme alt-right.
That flourish of uncertainty when the words come out?
Extreme alt-right.
It's worldwide, and what we've seen is that we've been a bit late to the party.
Yeah, if only someone could have warned us, eh?
We just don't have those sorts of groups.
Internationally, the evidence is that these groups began to form and recruit about 2015 and 16. They were really encouraged by Trump and what he did.
Whatever that was, it's not clear, as he did do more than one he did a few things.
And then we've seen that American populism, particularly things like QAnon began to have a big say in the conspiracy theories that were circulating.
Associating vague definitions like that, I think, can be sort of dismissive of some issues people genuinely care about, maybe indicative of that smug attitude toward people they see as less sophisticated, which in turn probably pushes those people into deeper mistrust or anti-establishment sentiment, and that sort of tends to exemplify what the establishment regard to be under the broad definition of conspiratorial thinking.
Police cleared half the grounds before all hell broke loose. The fires started.
Sort of circular, ironic maybe.
We saw that those sorts of dynamics begin to emerge during the 2020 general election. There were a number of minor political parties and activists who really began to use those QAnon arguments to argue that the same things were happening in New Zealand, the corruption of our politicians, the corruption and falsehoods that our media were giving us, our mainstream media were giving us.
I think it didn't used to be so contentious to suggest that there were varying degrees of corruption around. Some untoward stuff is unearthed every now and then. Should it be so controversial to think there's more of it out there, maybe?
When I was forced out of my electorate, I was devastated. And it is as a result of that corrupt process that I'm standing to deliver my valedictory statement today.
And so they had this distrust of our institutions and our distrust of our politics.
One of the more consequential lawmakers has now sort of been airbrushed from history, her accomplishments having sort of been credited to others. Hasn't this guy seen House of Cards?
Green Party members will soon need to make a decision on whether to scrap the rule requiring a male co-leader.
The party is looking to go further with a proposal for one co-leader to be female and the other any gender or identity.
The machinations behind the scenes, always some shenanigans going on. And with this sort of crossover between media and politics in an environment of
We will continue to be your single source of truth.
trust all round is probably going to continue declining. If you get people being vilified for making the odd valid observation, linking them to all those more far out there beliefs.
For 1,000 years our kind have lived beneath the earth's crust. We are the crab people!
The same research that I mentioned before shows the people that are active in New Zealand in online extreme and conspiratorial sites is almost double that of Australia and about triple that of Canada.
Again, this is so vague. And what constitutes an extremist website?
We saw this week that there was the fake news campaign around Ryan Bridge saying that he had been silenced by the Prime Minister, which of course isn't true.
Take a look at this.
Just to be clear, this is not a News Hub headline. Someone has altered a News Hub headline. PM Jacinda Ardern has filed to have Ryan Bridge banned from all major platforms and rejects any further interviews with the reporter.
She has not had me banned from this platform because here I am. So, fake news.
Where does that stuff originate from and how is it able to spread so widely?
Well, some of it does come out of the United States and, you know, they've been doing it for a bit longer than we have and so they've
Even the stuff on, say, the Prime Minister or Ryan?
I was going to come to that, Melissa, because I think what happens is it gets translated to New Zealand. So the distrust and, in fact, the vitriol directed at our politicians is complete. I mean, really, there are no politicians who are exempt from this. When I'm talking politicians, I'm talking parliamentarians.
Catch that? All right.
When I'm talking politicians, I'm talking parliamentarians. But what it does is it gets personalised. And so when you look at the online hate and disinformation and conspiracy theories, then when it comes to politicians, the vast majority of it is directed at our Prime Minister.
He just repeats exactly what she said, but takes 30 seconds longer to say it. If there is vitriol in politics, wouldn't it make sense that most of it went to whoever was at the top?
One of the problems, we media types have every week is that we don't want to keep talking about Donald Trump, but, you also can't not talk about Donald Trump. Tonight, I'm just going to say it. Donald Trump is fat. Donald Trump is fat. He's a fucking fat fuck.
Anybody physically hurting people just does a disservice to whatever that cause is and makes the world a worse place for everyone. But being so defensive over mean words...
Because anyone who badmouths a woman online is a hop, step and a jump away from ultimately becoming a genocidal white supremacist terrorist. This farcical attempt to put middle-class identity virtue signalling alongside national security threats is woke madness and will ultimately manufacture more radicals. You getting shitty things said anonymously online isn't a national security threat.
Don't claim expertise, please. And so they do that with other institutions as well, and that's why Ryan got targeted the other day. Someone somewhere has taken a dislike to Ryan and has put, 2 and 2 together to make 5 or 6 or 10.
5 or 6 or 10.
And then put together a really interesting package of disinformation. Pity about the misspelt word. It rather destroyed the effect. But it looked genuine, didn't it?
He just said it looked like bullshit. Then he's all like, oh no, it looked genuine, didn't it?
It looked as though it was real and that it somehow had come from News Hub.
Well, and also I wonder whether actually it wasn't really a dig at Ryan. It was trying to say that the Prime Minister silences journalists, which, we know that she didn't silence Ryan Bridge. I don't think many people do.
No.
It's suggested that this was an attack on the Prime Minister and Ryan. Mel tries to gently steer it away from that, as presumably the motivation was not anti-Ryan, because it was sort of following this interview he did that some people appreciated.
They are either going to fund these billions of dollars worth of cuts by, for instance, cutting health or education, or they're going to increase debt.
They didn't tell us yesterday how. No, there is a third option, though. They did not tell us how. Yeah, there is a third option, though, Prime Minister, and that is this argument about wasteful spending that your government's been indulging in. The Provincial Growth Fund that created how many jobs? You know, the $50 million designing the cycle bridge that was never built. Trevor Mallard's $500,000 slide and playground. The fees-free university money. I do not
accept for... I totally reject that.
So your government's never wasted any money?
Oh.
So if anything, this was probably coming from a pro-Ryan place, but hey, I'm no expert.
No. And just to finish that story, so what they're doing is targeting two of the institutions they don't like, which is politics and the media, and then they've used that dislike, that distrust of the Prime Minister to have a go at you guys and at Ryan in particular.
Nah, he just doesn't get it. The wider point, distrust of the media, has something to it. But in exploring this very specific example, he just doesn't get it.
So it's a way of targeting two of the institutions that they are really antagonistic towards.
Yeah.
She gets it, but he just doesn't get it. The expert just does not get it.
Yeah.
That's the end of it. If this thing worked, I think why it worked, maybe because there was that other time when...
Ardern personally instructed media not to ask about Ihumatao. Her office even threatened to restrict access to the Prime Minister for the rest of the trip if we did.
And of course, more recently than that...
She is running for the hills. She no longer wants to be on this programme. The somewhat tragic conclusion that is drawn is that the question she gets, the demand for a level of accountability, is a little bit tough. The reality is the Prime Minister enjoys a more cordial and compliant relationship with them. The questions are more softball.
Did your heart sink this afternoon when you heard the news?
Yes.
What I argue is the Prime Minister's a lightweight at answering tough questions. I mean, the number of times she's fronted on this program with no knowledge around the questions I'm asking is frightening.
I'm wondering, looking at all this, the fake headline, the vapid interview, and what's going on with MCG? Seemingly, possibly, maybe starting with her attempts to correct the professor instead of just letting it be.
I wonder whether actually it wasn't really a dig at Ryan.
I mean, he'll work it out one day. But what if it were imperative that Bridge remained a villain, a third-party commission perhaps, to carry out the doctoring of the headline? Naturally, the veracity of the image would have to be denied.
A lot of creative people out there.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of people with a lot of time on their hands.
The Prime Minister would have to affirm that she'll continue to be a guest on the show, even though secretly probably wouldn't have minded having an exit strategy for one day. But now she has to keep showing up or it'll be a bad look. And though Bridge could be a pesky interviewer, he and the much more pleasant good cop Mel alternated, so it wasn't all bad. The internet partisans had already been sicked on Ryan quite some time ago. He's just Mike 2.0 to them. But then, a couple of weeks later...
Okay, so the Breast Cancer Foundation, just if I can ask...
the health system, if I just might finish, please.
Things got heated with Mel as the Prime Minister tried to deflect and run out the clock on the subject of breast cancer screening.
With the exception of August last year, the numbers have been keeping pace with what we would expect.
Are the numbers being fudged to make it look like there is no backlog?
No, not at all.
We now know that there are 50,000 women overdue for their screening mammogram. We estimate that 300 of those women could have cancer.
The Cancer Control Agency says it's still not what they expected because it said the overall impact of COVID-19... I just want to correct what the Cancer Control Agency
I genuinely want to answer
said.
your question, so if I might speak to the screening issue...
we were going to speak about screening, but you were talking about the Cancer Control Agency. They are saying that there has been an impact. With the government saying on one hand that there is no backlog and Breast Cancer Foundation saying that there is 50,000 people overdue, there's a discrepancy.
Sorry, if I may, there's really not. During level 4, yes, we didn't have the same level of screening that was being undertaken. Now, in the COVID protection framework, we are seeing that the screening is available.
Okay,
so
but
we do need a recovery plan.
You were saying that
the
system is available. The Breast Cancer Foundation said this is absolutely an issue with availability. You suggested last week that it was potentially due to people not going, but it's actually about availability.
One of the things that we've had is feedback that people have been concerned about attending. So
that's certainly not what the Breast Cancer Foundation is saying, or what the feedback was from our viewers who said that they are trying to get appointments, but they're being delayed months.
There is no doubt that the issue of COVID has had an impact. It would have been a much greater impact had we not had the strategy we had.
Compare that to her softball humouring of the professor that other time, which may have indicated how little she thought of him. Alternatively, though, she could just be a misogynist, as is the basis in the eyes of many for any scrutiny. Management were accused of having a blatant conservative bias, and Mel was accused of being rude. And some people legitimately think that about TV3, the bias thing.
Based off my ideas, my formats, and my editorial decisions. I know you and your wife think I'm some kind of paranoid right-wing nutjob. The same paranoid nutjob who is lining your pockets.
Though the heat now seems to have been turned back down a bit.
No, I'm sorry, Prime Minister, what your minister just said...
I think, just...
No, please, it's yours. Floor's yours.
More like a grilling on the other channel.
And actually, I think I have a pretty good relationship with every caucus member.
What's your relationship like with Louisa?
Oh, again, I think fine.
Might be a bit of a stretch to suggest TV3 had a right-wing agenda.
You're depriving me of my property rights.
You are misinformed.
You work for the citizens. If you can't do that, we will find someone who can.
So what was it really all for? Who are those conservative business interests in bed with? Who did have the most to gain by all this? Big oil, big tobacco, big pharma, big tech, big dairy? No, close maybe. If this is what we're going to go with, then in the scheme of things, it's one of the more benevolent conspiracies.
So if you're due one, you didn't get one, go and make an appointment now.
Do you know what? I'd rather have somebody messing about up this end than that end.
Depends what's happening.
And if the PM's earnest gesticulating is to be believed, appointments are available. So try and go get one.
You know, the problem is someone's going to clip just that bit up.
Yeah. But this idea that we can clean up Twitter and protect you from fake news and disinformation, it's so ridiculous. It's like fact-checking the graffiti on the bathroom wall of a dive bar. People always lie. That's what people do. Every age is the misinformation age. Conservatives do seem to have a special talent for embracing the real eye-roll stuff. But 41% of Democrats last year believed the hospitalization rate if you got COVID unvaccinated was over 50%, when it was actually less than 1%. Somebody's misinformation got to those people. Sometimes misinformation is just history's first draft.
Don't claim expertise, please.